Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Corey Hughes' Bloody History. Today we're going to start something exciting and somewhat lengthy, probably the next week or two. We are going to start to go through Harold Weisberg's collection of files on Loran Hall. So this is pretty exciting stuff. We are getting into his collection on one of the shooters in the book depository on the 6th floor. I assume that a lot of the stuff we're going to go over has been ignored by the vast majority of researchers out there. They like to stick with the exciting stuff. And that's one thing I'm going to have to warn you about, is that this stuff is going to be pretty dry. Pretty dry. We're going to go through a lot of documents, and we're going to get a lot of Weisberg's personal thoughts and feelings via communications that he had sent. This first one being titled to Dear Dave. I'm assuming that's Dave Lifton. A lot of his communications are to other researchers. This is dated 11/14/90. Wow. That's way, way later than all the initial investigations, right? Interesting. 11/14/1990. Here we go. Dear Dave, I'm sorry you, Jerry, who has a bad knee, could not have been here yesterday to enjoy my two surprise visitors. Two now middle-aged anti-Castroites who figure in the official investigations of the JFK assassination, Jerry Patrick Hemming and Roy Hargraves. Hemming phoned from the AARC offices in D.C. yesterday morning to ask if they could come. I asked him to use pencil and paper and write down directions, and believe it or not, he did. He got off the expressway at the correct exit and then got lost making only the 2 turns required to get here, driving a not inexpensive and new van. It seems they're working for Bud Fensterwald and his Assassinations Archives and Research Center on the Ricky White concoction that his father Roscoe was one of JFK's assassins. Trying, as they correctly understand Bud's attitude, to prove that this fairy tale is or can be true after all, that has come to light, and all that I've told Bud that proves it isn't and can't be true. They understand that Bud is a true believer, that Jim Lazar tends to agree with him and feel as he does, that Kevin Walsh is troubled by it and in ways they can't identify, and that Mark Allen is openly skeptical. I'm not familiar with some of these names here. It was not easy to present to them the disproofs that I have because Hemming wanted to recall his past and the people he met and what he was doing and tended to monopolize, but Hargraves did make some notes. I gave them the items of disproof of the details of this concoction and the titles of the books that were plagiarized. They had seen a copy of the novel Promises to Keep at the AARC offices and had a copy of Popkins with them, the second Oswald. Hemming seems not to have aged as much as I've expected from the kind of life he leads, but his 6'6" body now bulges at the belly more than mine does, and Hargraves puffs out a bit there. I last saw Hemming 22 years ago, and I'd never seen Hargraves before. He surprised me, however, by quoting the Robert Frost poem from which the novel gets its title, Promises to Keep. Hemming, who has detested Hall for years, Loran Hall that is, confirmed that one of my Baltimore police friends, who'd been here earlier in the day and through lunch with his girlfriend, told me that Hall and his son had been arrested in Oklahoma selling some kind of dope pills to raise money for the Contras and were in jail for it. I was curious about some of the story Hall had given me on a number of occasions. For the first time in 3 days of interviews of him when he was in real pain from an illness I do not recall, in a Veterans Administration hospital in Los Angeles. The hospital that was destroyed later in an earthquake, at least more than a decade ago. He does confirm part of Hall's story that Castro had him jailed with Santos Traficante. My recollection is that Hall said in the same cell. Hemming, who says he then visited Hall during his detention in what he says had been a mental hospital, says Hall was in the cell next to it, but that he was permitted to share the food from the mafia boss and was able to have sent in. Not that any of their pasts is relevant to the JFK assassination, although it did figure in the investigations. That has to be pure sarcasm. With regard to the one real link of the men who appeared at Sylvia Odio's apartment in Dallas just before the assassination, with one presented to her as Leon Oswald, who said JFK should be killed, and he would show them how, both disagree with the account that one was Hall. They seem to have some kind of connection with the looks like Christic Institute, and that suit against the CIA over the bombing that was to have killed Eden Pastor for the Contras, instead wounded the correspondent Tony Avrinin and others. They claim that in Hemming's words, which is not easy to accept without confirmation, they are 99% sure that the man they think was at Odio's is the man who was responsible for that bombing. I made no effort to make notes, and I think it is not the significance of our conversation that would have interested you, but what these men said about their pasts, and those of other now middle-aged soldiers of fortune. I teased Hemming a bit about some of this and those we spoke about, like Robert K. Brown, publisher of Soldier of Fortune magazine. They see each other often. So often I asked him to tell Brown that he still owes me a Colorado double-bladed axe. Not that I can now use it. He says that the court decision against Brown and his magazine was reversed on appeal. If you do not remember, he was sued because someone responding to an ad in the magazine killed someone for the person who responded to that ad. And if you have forgotten Brown's link with the JFK investigation, he had been offered a large sum of money by a Southern California Arab dentist to kill JFK and thousands of members of Americans for Democratic Action, and if I recall correctly, Jews, and had not reported this to the FBI. To which he later confirmed it was when a student to whom he blabbed that story did tell the FBI. When I kidded Hemming about his open planning of a hop, skip, and a jump invasion of Cuba via Haiti in my presence, Larry Howard of the JFK investigation with us in Hemming's El Monte apartment, and this included his phone conversations about it. His response was that while they did not get to invade Haiti, they bombed the castle. He says that Howard Davis, who had been Raul Castro's personal pilot, flew the plane that did the bombing. Howie Davis is in the FBI records. Hemming claims to have met Roscoe White in Dallas in 1962, and that under FOIA he has gotten FBI records that confirm this. I asked him for copies, and he said he'd send them, but if I get them, I'll be surprised. He does acknowledge that does not confirm Ricky White's story. I don't know how they are financed, but I think it is not entirely by Bud because they had just left there and here, and I had to direct them to the Western Union offices where we waited for Hemming, who returned from it with the money he said he'd been waiting for him from Washington. From where we went to supper, which was large for both, and can't see what that says, and something noticed that Hemming did not leave a tip. I paid for our share while they were still eating at Carmack's, where you like the scrapple, and paid the tip at the same time for our share. Hargraves surprised me, not only in because he quoted Frost a bit, because of his interest in our local history and even in old buildings and architecture. He expressed interest in the older local buildings past which I looks like directed them and particular interest in the Hessian barracks, now part of the deaf and dumb school campus. The next to the top to the man now lives at the part not used for storage, and loves it from a story in the local paper. This building dates to the Revolutionary War, and Hessian troops were housed in it, thus the name. Hargraves also was appreciative of the moving of the John Hanson House from the other side of West Patrick Street, brick for brick, and being rebuilt as part of the new country courthouse. Hargraves is better educated and better read than Hemming, and he again surprised me by his knowledge of the obscure novel. Had been asked to read by a conservative friend a canticle for Leibowitz, as I thought it would. It interested them when I told them that the friend who loaned it to me is the brother-in-law of Miami's Mayor Suarez, one of the Cubans who have become prominent in Florida's political life. They did talk quite a bit about the so-called training for an invasion of Cuba on No Name Key. I asked Hargraves for his version of the death of one of them, Collins, from drowning when he was a skilled diver. It happened in shallow water, and Hargraves said it was while Collins was drunk. He said that Collins made it out while diving for tropical fish to sell, that he was kind of drunk who got nasty when drunk and tended to wildness. This matter used to interest the earlier nuts in the JFK case. I wonder if he's talking about Edwin Collins. With regard to the Mannlicher Carcano rifle, official dumb says Oswald used, it just happens that the Baltimore policeman who teaches an assassinations course at a community college had just that morning returned mine that he'd borrowed. Hemming then made graphic and detailed explanations to Hargraves of its many defects. He said that in those early anti-Castro days, they had been offered a quantity of these rifles and refused to accept them. They were that bad, that dangerous. And he explained and demonstrated some of the hazards. One I recall that could put the shooter's eye out. They laughed and laughed about anyone even thinking that such a weapon could be used in such a job. Hemming did say that Roscoe White had a quantity of them. I asked him what caliber because I knew Ricky had specified 7.65 instead of 6.5, and he said it was 7.65. Hargraves is not the braggart Hemming is, and he didn't once raise his voice. I found myself wondering how he had become involved in those kinds of activities so long ago, and had continued in them since. Both seem to be working as investigators now. I did not ask them for any details on this other than the ostensible purposes of their visit, but in the course of our conversation, Hemming did confirm aspects of what Hall had told me of his transporting weapons and other things from the west coast of Florida back in the 1963 months that are in the FBI reports. Lester Logue. Ergo and Tony, pull up what you can on Lester Logue. A wealthy Dallas right-winger did confirm that Hall had left a trailer load of this stuff in his garage, as Hall had told me. I think, but I'm not sure, that was the time Hall was arrested with it after the JFK administration had begun to clamp down on those activities. They had expected Jim and Mark Allen to still be working at 8 last night because they expected to speak to them when they phoned. Instead, they left a message for Jim on his answering machine that they'd be in touch this morning. They stayed at the Masser Motel because of the old-fashioned kind of individual cabins, and he wanted to have the van with what they held, particularly records, to be close to their room for security reasons. I think also because they liked the rate of $34, which is also much less than they'd been paying. They laughed about their first accommodations in the D.C. area after they checked in. They learned it was a black cat house. They did not find it of interest to them when I told them that where Western Union now is, at the Truckers Truck Stop Motel, has the reputation of also being a whorehouse. This is to say that they were not interested in women and sex, but in the kind of accommodations they wanted for security and economy. Economy indicates that whoever is paying their expenses is not overly generous with money. It makes me suspect that their interest in this involvement is not financial. They obviously had little money when they got here because they said they had to get money at Western Union or they'd not have money for supper in the motel unless they did. Although their connections, at least of the past, seem to have been with right-wingers and their anti-communist past, if not present, seems to include them as right-wingers, they spoke of right-wingers they named in a deprecating manner and seemed to be saying they were not of such beliefs. If Hemming was truthful, it seems that Garrison tried to interest them in working for or with him. Hemming did not say that some of those names came up in Garrison's talk, like Larry Laborde had CIA connections and contract agents. But they could not specify any reason for the CIA to use the likes of Roscoe White as a contract agent. They could think of no service he could render as a contract agent. They had little knowledge of Joe West or Gary Shaw or the preacher named Shaw, who was part of the White story, and in general it is apparent that although they knew of Popkin's book, they had seen the novel, Bud and Jim had not cued them in on the disproof of it that I give them. They knew of the rupture between Westix and the Dallas Center, but not that West had continued to be connected with it through the Ricky White press conference it staged for him. In terms of their investigation, when I told them I had the AP wire copy on it, they did not ask to see it. They did not know that Ricky's first ghostwriter was the former Dallas cop Abshire, who uses the pen name Anderson, and did not know, although Bud et al. were well aware of it, that he put an outline of Ricky's story on paper. I did not tell them I had a copy, but suggested they ought look it up when they are in Dallas again. I know that Jim sent Kevin down to investigate because Jim doubted part of the story at least. That Kevin gave an account of his interview of Anderson, the name in Kevin's report. So I wonder what kind of investigation Bud et al. Really wanted when they keep this kind of disproof of what Ricky has been saying from their investigators. My, how these people waste their time and money, only to, in the end, magnify the destruction of all credibility of their nuttiness and the attention they get for it. These two seem to understand that Bud is anxious to break the case open and nothing else interests him. It did not seem to discourage them a bit. In haste this early morning before I got out for the papers and then do my walking with best to you all, Harold. Interesting stuff, right? You see, you're not going to find this kind of stuff in any FBI or CIA document. You're going to find this in these personal communications. Although Harold Weisberg he loved his goddamn typewriter. He wrote so many of these fucking letters over the years to so many fucking people. It is absolutely unbelievable. We're never going to be able to get to all of them because there's so goddamn many of them. So, but we're going to get through a couple more of these today, hopefully. But yes, this goes into like the mindset of like Jerry Hemming and Roy Hargraves, two guys who I can't pin any part of the assassination on. I mean, they were part of Interpen, and our known bad guys, Howard, Hall, and Seymour, were all part of that group, right? And so these guys seem like they're kind of hanging around for two reasons. One, they need to make some money, and two, they want to make sure who knows what and that they're not linked to anything. And that's kind of what I get from this, because like these guys, even if Jerry Hemming was in Dallas, like I don't put a rifle in his hand, I don't put him anywhere of any consequence. He most certainly was not running with our trio of mercenaries in Dallas in the weeks that they were there leading up to the assassination, or in October. He was there with, who was it? Was it Loran Hall that he went to see General Walker with in March of 1963, just prior to the April 10th shooting at Walker's house by Howard and Seymour? So who knows? Interesting stuff here, but it appears that nobody liked fucking Loran Hall. Loran Hall was a douche, and they all knew it, and none of these guys liked him. So let's move on. We have plenty of documents to get through today. This one is to Dear Sam. I don't know who Sam is. Also dated 11/14/90. This guy is like, man, Nowadays, you could just send a fucking email. Back then, you had to write a fucking letter, so you had to make sure it was long and had everything you had to say in it for a week, right? Whew. Dear Sam, your 2 letters of the 8th came yesterday when I had 2 middle-aged soldiers of fortune about whom I enclose a memo that understates the nature of some of the conversation. Rather oddly, I've thought one of them has over the years referred reporters to me when they had interest in him, Hemming. He had been a leader of at least one of the illiberal political groups that regarded all who opposed U.S. Latin American policy as Reds. He had a paramilitary organization I forgot to mention in the memo, which I began writing at 3:30 a.m., which he called, as I recall, the International Penetration Brigade. It was Interpen, the Intercontinental Penetration Force. He spent many years providing arms to illiberal gangs in Latin America, and though I did not ask him, I believe this would have included the Contras and possibly governments if they had the need, like others in Central America. He did fly small planes, and he does have expert knowledge of rifles, at least. Something rather enjoyed their visits too, because she'd in the past met only a couple of such types who visited here. I also forgot to include in the memo that these characters still have and still use why I can't imagine an encrypting and decrypting device of World War II era. The one they brought into the house to demonstrate to me, described as one used by the OSS and made by the Army's Signal Corps. It was less than 3 by 5 by 6 and was in perfect condition. Can you imagine this being transported all around this country and being used today? Their surprise visit was a reminder of all the immune violations of our laws by so very many wrongly dedicated Americans. These people lived in constant violation of, for example, the ancient Neutrality Act. With full federal knowledge of it, it was no secret that they engaged in military training for military action inside countries with which we were not at war, and with all but one of which maintained diplomatic relations. JFK did order that they be clamped down on, but nothing really hurtful followed his order. Before he switched it to what is fairly well-known, Soldier of Fortune magazine, Robert K. Brown published much detailed information on a wide variety of weapons and on how to use them, including even knives and explosives. And I recall no emphasis in his literature on not using this information inside the U.S. His enterprise was then titled Paladin Press. He then and now is in the same location, Boulder, Colorado. Brown was a captain in the Army Reserve when he was propositioned to wholesale assassins and murder without reporting it to any authority. What happened after the FBI confirmed this proposition? He was promoted to major. His name came up in the Iran-Contra hearings without any effort to include any of his background and acts in the hearings, even in the questioning of the man who testified that Ollie North had sent him to confer with Brown and others whose names meant nothing to me as I heard them mentioned. The witness was the guy who was also in the so-called, well, I've forgotten his title. It was in state. It was not because none of the committee knew anything about Brown, because I sent some of the members copies of the FBI reports I have. No response from anyone. The witness is the guy who sang aspens of praise to Kali in his testimony, to Ali in his testimony, the one Ali spent some contra money on for a wedding present. Hall had also been a political activist in or leading the elections campaign of extremist House and or UTT in California. I don't know what that means. He was closely aligned with Mexican fascists, among others. There are several Larry Howards. The one connected with both Hall and Hemming is the Chicano, and he is still engaged in such activities. I've forgotten what Hemming said they are when I asked him. I was tired. Aside from training with these people on No Name Key, which, as I recall, is just off the Florida West Coast, Howard was with Hall on at least one of 3 trips on which he openly transported such cargo as rifles from the West Coast of Florida, or from the West Coast to Florida, for use in violation of our laws, if the transportation alone was not also a violation. He told me that he was arrested only once in Dallas, but the DA when he was my friend about 20 years ago, checked his records or had them checked while I was with him and denied it happened. Hall had told me that he'd pulled some radical right strings there and had it wiped out and was freed. It is now 30 years since Castro took power, and these people are still active doing the kinds of things they should never have done, and they still believe it is right and proper and true form of patriotism. One of the things they mention is that in those early days, when they had little food, they got day-old Jewish rye and other bakery products from Adler's Bakery in Miami. Hemming did serve time in jail, but I've forgotten why. That Hall would mimic Ali and sell prohibited substances to raise money for the Contras does not surprise me, nor does it that he would include his own son. He really believes that such illegal acts that are also so morally reprehensible are truly patriotic and American. It is not easy to understand this, and I'm sure it is. He is not unique in it. So really, what Weisberg is saying here in relation to Hemming and these guys and what they would do to raise money for these various causes, what he's doing is he is condemning this. And he's condemning the modus operandi of the CIA, because the CIA does this exact same thing, right? They sell drugs, they human traffic, they do all this stuff for money so they can carry out their fucking illegal and covert wars around the world, right? It's just so shocking when I read some of these writings, and it's like I read what you get an inside view into somebody what like Weisberg and what his mindset is, and how does he not understand this? Like, I just don't get it. How does he not understand this stuff? He was in the OSS. How does he not completely get it? There then were openly fascistic groups, especially in California, and he told me that one headed by a ruffian named Clint Wheat, that's G. Clinton Wheat, was one of his suppliers of arms for use abroad. Last I heard of Wheat many years ago, he was on the lam. I do not recall the charge against him. This tiny sample of such activity by Americans and the immunities they enjoyed, along with the support they found, including from public officials and the wealthy, may seem strange and not like us to those who've never had any contact with those I think of as the dedicated wrong. But they mimic official policies. They did in their anti-Castro activities, for example. And then there's a story I'll enclose from today's Washington Post headed CIA organized secret army in Western Europe. It should have been plural from the story, which may or may not have appeared in the Times and elsewhere. By, quote, Western, the story includes virtually every country not behind the Iron Curtain. As you'll see, there is extensive official corroboration in several countries, and that the military supplies provided by the CIA disappeared from time to time and were used by extremists. I am reminded of the killing of the leftist Italian publisher who published me, Giacomo Feltrinelli, because I wondered at the time if he was assassinated by CIA-related rightist extremists. One of those I involved in such activities in Italy says he quit them when he learned they were to engage in political assassinations. Wow, this is touching on like Gladio stuff. As Brandes, or was it Cardoza, said, for good or ill, the government is teacher of us all. I've wondered again. I'll resume response to your letters later. You did refer to the election of Wellstone to the Senate from Minnesota. It happens that there is a long story about him and the campaign he waged in this morning's style section of the Post. It is enclosed. Best Herald. Interesting stuff, right? Branching out into other things. All right, moving on. All right. This one's kind of a short, it's an interesting one. I'm just going to read it off because it has some names in it. It says optional form number 10, U.S. government memorandum. It's got to be FBI documentation. Yeah, this is all FBI stuff. From SAC Dallas, that's Forrest Sorrells. To Director FBI, that's J. Edgar Hoover. Subject, travel of the President in the United States and Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Rebu Airtel to all offices, 41364, enclosed herewith is one copy of a letterhead memorandum on each of the subjects here and after. Listed copies of these memoranda previously having been disseminated to Secret Service locally. The names: William Houston Seymour, Neutrality Act, Dallas File 2-68. Loran Eugene Hall, Neutrality Act, Dallas File 2-68. Bunch of redacted names. Then we get Roger Goldsmith, Information Concerning, Dallas File 8943. And then Doug Sanders, Information Concerning, Dallas File 8943. Next file, FBI Dallas, Urgent 91564. To Director, Los Angeles, Miami. From Dallas, Lee Harvey Oswald, a.k.a. ISR Cuba. Following matter concerns information furnished to President S. Commission by Sylvia Odio, a Cuban refugee residing in Dallas, Texas, who claims that person believed by her to have been Lee Harvey Oswald and two individuals using anti-Castro Cuban war names of, quote, Leopoldo, quote, and possibly Angelo, quote, had appeared at her apartment door evening of either September 26 or 2763, stating they were members of Cuban underground and solicited her help in translating Spanish note to be used in anti-Castro movement. So we're talking about the Sylvia Odio incident, and please note, this is in the Loran Hall file, right? This is in Weisberg's Loran Hall file because Loran Hall went to Sylvia Odio's and he admitted it. Sylvia Odio is a young Cuban divorcee, daughter of Amador Odio, Pedron and Sarah Del Toro, father presently in prison, Isle of Pines, Cuba, for anti-Castro activities. Rest of family in United States. Sylvia Odio, born May 4, 37 in Havana, Cuba. White, dark brown hair. At time of visit by three individuals, Odio residing in apartment, quote, a, quote, 1080 Magellan Circle, Dallas, which address in located approximately 5 miles east of downtown Dallas in large garden apartment type development. Odio has mental, if I can't read that, if imminent background and commission requested, expedite investigation to determine her reputation for veracity. Views of those interviewed this regard are at variance. However, some state that if Odio says she was visited by three individuals as noted above, she probably was so visited. Attention receiving offices called to their file pertaining Loran Eugene Hall, a.k.a. IS-Cuba, Boo File 105-78016, LA File 2-228, and MM File 105-968, DL File 2-68. Review Hall File Dallas indicates he was in Dallas as of October 1-7, last along with William Houston Seymour, and both arrested by Dallas police on investigation violation dangerous drug law. Both released for no case and not photographed by DPD. File indicates Hall has collected money in 1963 to finance Cuban raid, is violently anti-communist and anti-Castro. Make practice of appearing before John Birch Society meetings seeking funds. In mid-63, Hall left Los Angeles area and became active in, quote, Committee to Free Cuba, quote, described as a group attempting to raise funds to channel any legitimate organization attempting to overthrow Castro. MM informant advised that Hall and William Houston Seymour visited Dallas in October 63 to collect money donations under guise of representing anti-Castro organization. One soldier of fortune friend of Hall's is Lawrence Howard, also known as, quote, Larry, quote, Mexican, quote, an individual of Mexican-American descent who in summer of 63 went with Hall to California. Howard last reported to be in Veracruz, Mexico. It is noted that Sylvia Odio believes the two men who accompanied Oswald to her home were not Cubans, but possible Mexicans. Odio believes the white man was introduced to her as, quote, Leon, quote, last name sounded like Oswald. Possibility exists. Last name could have been, quote, Hall, quote. Odio noted that the white man spoke only a few sentences and words in Spanish. Dallas has no photographs of Hall, Seymour, or Howard to display to Odio. Expedite investigation being requested Los Angeles to locate and interview Loran Hall, whose last known address believed Post Office Box 84, Kernville, California, or possibly Rainbow Motel, same city. Ascertain from Hall whereabouts period September 2-6- 763, whether he made such a described video to apartment of Odio. If so, obtain identities of his friends who accompanied him. Obtain photographs of Hall for display to Odio, as he fits description of person he believes was Oswald who visited her apartment. Miami review files for any photographs of Hall, Seymour, or Howard, and if available, expeditiously furnish same to Dallas for display to Odio. Expedite investigation as President's Commission most desirous of clarifying information re Oswald as furnished by Odio as same conflicts with other info reference Oswald's whereabouts on dates in question. Other states advise September end and ACK period. That's end of that memo. Teletype to SAC Kansas City, Miami, and San Diego from Director FBI Lee Harvey Oswald, a.k.a. ISR Cuba, Kansas City. Obtain photograph and description of Loran E. Hall. Arrested by PD, Wichita, Kansas, December 16, 1961. Under number 1408354 for DL-shoplifting. San Diego. Obtain photographs of William Houston Seymour. Arrested December 3/1959 by San Diego under number 1793111 for drunk, and by PD San Diego March 21, 1959 under number 162450 for burglary. So William Seymour spent some time in San Diego. Note to self. Miami. Obtained photograph of Seymour, who arrested by Key West December 4, 1962 under number 6212 for violation of Neutrality Act. Recipients furnish photographs to Bureau in Dallas by Airtel. Handle immediately. Dallas furnished copies by mail. Teletype to SAC Kansas City, Miami, San Diego. Lee Harvey Oswald. Note for SAC Dallas. Neurotel 6:35 p.m. 9/15/64. Persons named herein possibly identical with Loran Eugene Hall and the William Houston Seymour referred to in Rotel. Upon receipt of photographs, display same immediately to Sylvia Odio and other pertinent witnesses. Note, this involves allegation of Sylvia Odio, who insists that a Leon Oswald and two members of anti-Castroites' JURE organization, Jure, visited at her apartment, Dallas, 9/26 or 9/27. It is not possible for Oswald to have visited her on those dates, as we know he was then en route to Mexico City by bus. That's false. While Odio has suffered nervous breakdown and is undoubtedly wrong re-presence of Oswald, it does appear likely that some individuals visited her apartment in late September, as a younger sister confirms this. Dallas has determined that Loran Hall and Seymour, known anti-Castroites, were in Dallas in October 1963. It begins to look like the Leon Oswald may be Loran Hall. Nope, William Seymour, buddy. You got close, but no cigar. Commission has requested most expeditious handling of inquiry into Odio's claims. We do not have photographs of Hall and Seymour in BOO files or in identification. However, photographs are available as indicated herein. Teletype necessary to expedite handling. Dated September 16th, 64. Moving on. Open text, teletype to SAC Dallas from Director FBI. Lee Harvey Oswald is -R-Cuba. Sylvia Odio and page 4 of your LHM dated September 14 last. Resolve all questions arising as a result of Miss Insua's advice to Mrs. Connell concerning the two men who contacted Insua looking for Odio. Ooh, I'm not sure what this is. Insua, I-N-S-U-A. I'm assuming that's a name. Note, Odio claims that Oswald and two others visited her at her apartment in Dallas on September 26 or 27, 1963. It is not possible for Oswald to have been there on those dates. We now believe that the man thought to be Oswald is likely a Loran Hall, a prominent anti-Castroite. Commission has requested expeditious inquiry to prove or disprove Odio's claim. LHM shows that Insua told Connell that on that date, not stated, two men called at her apartment seeking to find Odio, and that Odio later told her the two men were from anti-Castro organizations seeking her support. While Insua was interviewed, she was not questioned about this, nor have we spoken to Odio about it. I need to pull the information on Miss Insua, I-N-S-U-A. All right. Another memo dated September 23rd, 1964 to SAC Miami from SAC Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald, a.k.a. ISR Cuba. Read Dallas Airtel to Bureau Miami and Los Angeles dated 9/22/64. Forwarding photographs of William Houston Seymour and Lawrence John Howard Jr. to be exhibited to Miss Sylvia Odio. Enclosed herewith to the Miami offices is a copy of Kansas City Airtel to the Bureau dated 9/18/64 and the photograph of Loran E. Hall forwarded with that communication. Additional photographs of Hall will be furnished the Miami office upon their receipt from the Los Angeles office. Memorandum 923/64 from SAC Shanklin. Subject Lee Harvey Oswald, ISR Cuba. Inspector James R. Malley called at 8:30 a.m. today and advised as follows. A member of the commission allegedly talked to Roy Truly and Patrolman Marion L. Baker of the Dallas PD yesterday when these two were questioned by representatives of the commission. Either before the hearings or when the depositions were taken, they neglected to get an answer for the following. Did Truly or Baker see anyone in the lunchroom on the second floor when they encountered Oswald there? Both Truly and Baker, as Malley recalled, ran up the steps and toward the little room, and they saw someone through the glass door, and they found Oswald with a Coke, and he walked out of the room through the office where the employees were not normally supposed to be. Did they see anyone else around in the lunchroom at that time? Dallas is requested to obtain signed statements from both regarding that phase. Baker can be best located through the Dallas Police Department. Mr. or Dr. Goldberg indicated that he had talked to both Patrolman Baker and Mr. Truly yesterday. When statements obtained, send to Bureau AM as quickly as possible, marked for the attention of Mr. Rosen, R-O-S-E-N. Mr. Malley also mentioned that the Bureau has made arrangements to obtain 100 copies of the Commission's report and that each field office will be furnished a copy. Dallas will receive 4 or 5 copies, he believed, and he stated it would not be necessary for the field offices to index the report. Okay, interesting stuff here. So this is kind of wedged in here in the Loran Hall file, right? And you have a request for information on William Houston Seymour and Lawrence John Howard's, right? So what you got here is you have Weisberg lumping all of this stuff in the Loran Hall file. Why is that? Because he knew, or maybe he didn't know, he might be fucking stupid because Kennedy researchers are stupid. He might have been starting to assume or put together the fact that these fucking idiots were inside the book depository on November 22nd, and that the incident involving Truly and Baker involved one of them and might not have occurred in the lunchroom, because it didn't. It didn't. And I don't know how the fuck these people didn't put 2 and 2 together on that way the fuck back when, because really, once you analyze the statements of Vicki Adams, it becomes pretty fucking clear that Oswald wasn't on the fucking steps. And if Oswald wasn't on the steps, who was on the fucking steps? Right? And the telling of the tale on the second floor, 90 seconds after, very important, because that is what they used to cover for the fact that they made another arrest of Emilio Santana in Dealey Plaza, right? So that's all my thesis on that. But yeah, I think that Weisberg might have had an inkling, and that's why all this stuff here is in the Loran Hall file. All right, so what is this? DFO, that's Dallas Field Office, 89-43, serial 7726. This looks like a typewritten letter. It doesn't look like any kind of official documentation. 9/17/1863 matter. Let me see. What happened on 9/17 and 1863? September 17th or 18th. Oh, it's before Mexico City. It's before the Sylvia Odio incident. It's before the majority of the incidents at the gun range. 9/17/18. I'm not sure. Those guys could have still been in Los Angeles at that time. So let's see. The first paragraph includes the director had seen something saying the same thing happened on 9/17/63. Oh, 9/17/63 is when they went to it was when Kerry Thornley went and got the fucking visa to Mexico City in Oswald's name, right? That happened on September 17th in New Orleans, but I think they're talking about Dallas here. Let me reread that. The first paragraph includes, quote, the director has seen something saying the same thing had happened on 9/17/63. In this case, the same thing refers to Jim Garrison, having said that Oswald had alerted the FBI that an assassination attempt would be made on the President Kennedy in Dallas on 11/22/63. Okay, let me just say this for the fucking record. I don't believe Oswald knew about any assassination attempts. I don't fucking think he knew a goddamn thing. The guy's a bump on a log. He was being kept out of Dallas, kept out of New Orleans. He was being kept out of fucking town because he's a patsy. They needed to make sure he didn't know fucking nothing. He was out doing other things at the times that they said he was doing things in Dallas and New Orleans. Therefore, no, I don't think he knew any of the shit about fucking, he had to fucking thwart the assassination because he's a fucking hero. Fuck right off with your goddamn romanticization of history. Fucking people piss me off. While there are records indicating considerable FBI HQ interest in a, quote, matter, for which the dates of 9/17 and 18 are both given, nothing in the Dallas files have been provided that indicates what this matter was. This record indicates that Director Hoover had something reach his desk relating to it. Shanklin's formulation, or Supervisor Brannigan's representation of the alleged threat, is rather restrictive and eliminates a possible alternative. The language of the memo: did Dallas send out any such teletypes, or did Dallas receive any such teletype? Now, this had not been in reference to Lee Harvey Oswald had alerted the FBI that an assassination attempt would be made on President Kennedy, and if the inquiry had been more general in nature, like, can you think what they could be talking about, Dallas should have been able to come up with some current known threats against President Kennedy. In this regard, the records provided on Norman Lee Elkins are entirely inadequate and do not begin to reflect what I know has to be in the files of the Dallas field office because of what I have obtained from the National Archives. There's an addendum on page 2. In the last sentence, with regard to Loran Eugene Hall, here spelled Loran, L-O-R-E-N, instead of Loran, L-O-R-A-M, there is a claim to B7C exemption with regard to Hall. It is entirely improbable, if in fact impossible, for there to be any possibility of making a privacy claim with regard to Hall after all the attention he has sought and the greater attention he has received. Parenthetically, the second paragraph of the addendum supports Hall's statements to me, including that he was arrested in Dallas in October of '63. The FBI had talked to him. Now we have a memorandum attached to that same file. It just says, to file from SAC Gordon Shanklin, subject assassination of President Kennedy, Dallas, Texas, 11/22/63. Information concerning Lee Harvey Oswald, a.k.a. Internal Security, and I think it's going to be R-Cuba. On 12/27/67, Supervisor William Brannigan called from the Bureau and referred to various articles appearing in Washington papers, New York Times, New Orleans, etc., concerning Garrison's press release. He stated that generally the director had asked questions regarding Garrison, saying that on 11/17/63, Lee Harvey Oswald had alerted the FBI that an assassination attempt would be made on President Kennedy in Dallas, 11/22/63. He stated it was also indicated, particularly in the New York Times, that the FBI sent out a TWX, probably from headquarters, that on 11/22/63 an attempt would be made to assassinate President John F. Kennedy. Did Dallas send out such a teletype, or did Dallas receive any such teletype? He stated also that the director had seen something saying that the same thing had happened on 9/17/63. I pointed out to Mr. Brannigan that apparently this was a typographical error on the part of an AP release, which we received here, as all the other releases were talking about November 17/63, but he stated that he wanted the same answers and same checks be made as to that date. In addition, he stated that the New York Times was carrying a story to the effect that Garrison had stated that one Loran Hall of California had inside knowledge of the assassination plot on that day, that it happened, and that he never called before the Warren Commission. He was never called before the Warren Commission. He stated, however, the New York Times also indicated that Loran Hall was mentioned in the Warren report, and that he had been interviewed by the FBI and told the FBI in September of 1963 that he was in Dallas, Texas, soliciting aid for a group against Castro of Cuba. The director wanted to know, when did we first talk to Hall? Addendum. At 3:45 p.m. on this date, I telephonically advised Mr. William Brannigan that the records of the Dallas office do not reflect that we ever received any threat on President Kennedy's life, and that with particular reference to the date of September 17, 1963 and November 17, 1963, we did not send any teletype to anyone, including the Bureau, in this regard, nor did we receive any such teletype. He stated that a check of the Bureau abstracts reflected one teletype from Dallas on 11/17/63. It had something to do with an unknown subject and a bomb in the Baker Hotel. I checked and found that this was our file 157302, and this had to do with receiving a call from police department to the effect of someone with the welcoming committee for Governor George Wallace of Alabama had received a telephone call on November 17, 1963, to the effect that there might be a bomb in the Baker Hotel tomorrow. I advised him that nothing had come of this, and that no connection with President Kennedy's visit. I also advised him that a check of our records reflected that the first time that Loran Eugene Hall was interviewed in connection with the assassination was by S.A. Leon F. Brown on 9/16/64 at Johnsondale, California. This interview is reported on page 3 of the report by S.A. Harry H. Whidbey, Los Angeles, dated 9/25/64. I pointed out to him, however, that I could not exactly say when Hall had first been interviewed by the FBI, because our files reflected that he had been talked to in Dallas on 10/17/63 while he was in custody of the local police for possession of drugs, and that he had not given some information concerning his connection with the Cuban Revolutionary Council, or that he had given information regarding his connection to the Cuban Revolutionary Council, that we had sent this information by LHM to the Bureau and various other offices by Airtel and LHM 102363, and that the Bureau had come back by letter to Kansas City dated 11/6/63, and various other offices pointing out that Hall was emotionally disturbed and that apparently no further inquiries were warranted other than an indices check requested by Dallas. I pointed out to him, however, that our file reflected that the Bureau had been office of origin, and in a case styled or titled, even though it says styled, it meant titled, Loran Eugene Hall, and there's something's redacted here, and our file would not necessarily show exactly when the first interview was on this matter. So, yeah, so I just want to comment real quickly. This report of S.A. Harry H. Whidbey, which was originally taken by Leon F. Brown on 9/16/64. That's the interview where Loran Hall admits that he was fucking at the Sylvia Odio's, okay? I don't think I have it in this collection of documents, but maybe I'll find it. Well, I'll find it at some point, probably after we get through all the Weisberg stuff, because I'll move on to, like, Loran Hall's, like, executive testimony at the HSCA and all that stuff that we get into, or the ARB, I forget which one. But we'll get into all that Loran Hall stuff down the road. All right, let's move on. Another document, SAC Dallas, 9/18/75. Assassination of President Kennedy, Dallas 11/22/63, miscellaneous information concerning. Enclosed herewith for Dallas are 2 copies of an FD 302, reflecting an interview of Loran Eugene Hall on 9/2/75. G. Dwayne Batt, Supervisor, Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement, Department of Justice, States, California, advised his neighbor, Loran Eugene Hall, requested he arrange an interview for him with the FBI, inasmuch as he claimed to have information regarding the assassination not previously furnished to the FBI. Above being furnished in view of Hall's allegations and the possibility of his being subpoenaed before the church committee. Yeah, so in the 70s, I think Loran Hall was freaking out because he was going to get subpoenaed to the church committee and, like, all kinds of other shit. All right. FBI, looks like a memo, dated 9/17/75. Loran Eugene Hall was interviewed at his request. Also present at this interview was G. Dwayne Batt, Supervisor, Bureau of Narcotics, Department of Justice, State of California. Hall advised that in 1959 he was imprisoned in Cuba by Fidel Castro for conspiring to overthrow the government. He had been in Cuba along with several other mercenaries training guerrilla troops to overthrow the government of Juan Batista. He was released from the Cuban prison after signing a statement denouncing his American citizenship. After his release from prison, he returned to the United States and began a series of speaking engagements sponsored by the John Birch Society. The purpose of the speaking tour was to raise funds to finance a mercenary force of Cuban refugees to return to Cuba and assassinate Castro. Hall advised he was subsequently arrested for violations of the Neutrality Act, and a large supply of arms, ammunition, and medical supplies was seized from him on No Name Key, Florida. Hall exhibited a copy of an interview of him by S.A. Leon F. Brown, Los Angeles, regarding his involvement with individuals in Dallas, Texas, immediately prior to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Hall advised that the report of the interview prepared by S.A. Brown was fictitious and was not an accurate statement of the remarks which he made to S.A. Brown. He advised that in addition to the falsification of the above document, someone had altered a YMCA registry in Dallas, Texas. Hall advised someone had added the name of a third associate of his to the registry. He was advised that he and William Seymour stayed at the YMCA, but when the document appeared before a grand jury in New Orleans, Louisiana, directed by James Garrison, a third name had been added to the registry. Hall added that he was making these facts known to the FBI at this time inasmuch as he feared his life was in danger. Hall advised that he is positive someone, either FBI or CIA, is surveilling him and has on one occasion forced him off the road in an attempt to murder him. Hall advised he feels this is being done because he possesses information regarding the assassination of President Kennedy and the CIA's involvement in attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro. Hall advised that recently a newspaper known as the National Tatler carried a special edition alleging that he was one of several men responsible for killing President Kennedy. Hall furnished a copy of the National Tatler dated September 1975 entitled Kennedy Murder Solved. It contains numerous references to him and his alleged involvement in a conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy. Hall advised he anticipates being subpoenaed before a congressional committee directed by Senator Frank Church of Oregon in the very near future. Yes, juicy stuff. Love it. All right, we're back to another letter. Dated 11/15/1990. This is another letter about the visit by Hemming and Hargraves by Harold Weisberg, right, the next day, and it says, add to visit by Hemming and Hargraves. While it was not generally known contemporaneously, and I've never seen referred to in the major media except for infrequent isolated instances, the influx of Cubans after Castro took power was accompanied by the extensive participation of some of them in criminal activities. For a while beginning, then, Cubans seemed to be a major part of the distributing drugs on the streets of the East Coast in particular. I presume that those engaging in such criminal activities are a minority. Some of these men who were trained for the Bay of Pigs invasion and were also equipped by the CIA were trained to use explosives, and they did in the United States. There will be instances scattered in my files. I did not dream that this would become as widespread as it did become. The victims were those regarded as of the left, and it included lawyers and publishers. Of those cases that got attention, the best known is the assassination of the former Chilean former minister in the heart of Washington, Letelier. While the honcho was a renegade American, the Cubans provided what he needed and helped him with the execution. Such Cubans also practice this kind of violence within the exile community, and the statistics I've seen relating to what they've done in Florida and in the Miami area in particular are, as I recall, staggering. Best known of these is probably Orlando Bosch, an extremist of the right and as a doctor. After I made copies of the comments I recorded after Hemming and Hargraves left and put some in envelopes for mailing, I noticed first that what had been an extensive file on Loran Hall is entirely missing. It had contained notes on my interviews of him and of his telephone calls to me and of clippings, plus quite a few photographs, some of which he'd borrowed and then refused to return. I checked the overflow and dead files removed from my office to the basement, and it is not there either. Then when I located the Hargraves file where it should have been, there was but a single item in it, a clipping report that he had pled guilty to a charge of bombing a Southern California office of students from a democratic society in 1963. The clipping also reports that although his confessed crime was serious, a felony, he was permitted to enter a plea to only a misdemeanor and got a slight sentence. He does not look like a man who would do such a thing, do what could kill young people and endanger others. As I noted, he quoted Robert Frost accurately. As I did not note, he was impressed by the sunset as we drove to the Western Union and commented on it. But aside from the violence intended against Cubans inside Cuba, he practiced it in his own land against his own people. With regard to the missing Hall file, there can be another explanation. I hope it did not also hold the tapes of my interviews, which might be of interest to others in the future. Which seemingly are fucking missing, right? After my first thrombosis, I had a few hood students work part-time on such things as filing. As my office files grew, the drawers got crowded. I had done the initial transfers to basement files. These required some shifting of files in my office. One of these students was the daughter of a preacher. After she left, I found that there was an extensive disorganization and misfiling. I found still another one 10 or more years later. When I was doing the filing I refer to above and corrected it. I also note that with regard to this student, who was the only such illustration among the students who worked for me part-time, she could not be innocent in this. She just didn't give a damn. And when she transferred the files, she just stuck them anyplace at all. I'm sure she didn't worry about this because the only reason I had such help was my inability to stand still and to limit on my safe use of the cellar stairs. Yet when she completed law school and required recommendations, she had the gall to cite me without having consulted me as one who could give her a character reference. It was a rather neutral when I provided it. So it is possible that in shifting files around to make space in my office that she may have misfiled the hall file, either in my office or in the basement overflow. Since discovering the mess she made, I have done what file shifting was required. I have no reason to believe that anyone who had access to my file stole the hall file, and it was intact as of the day of his testimony before the House Assassination Committee, when I loaned him the photos from it. When Hemming was rambling about his past, he mentioned the time he'd served in jail. Hargraves made no comment on his own jail time or the reason for it. All right. We've made it through the first 14 files of Weisberg's collection of documents on Loran Eugene Hall. And that's where we're going to leave it for today. We're going to pick up here tomorrow on item number 15. And as always, if you have not yet picked up the book, please pick up the book. You can get it on Amazon.com. It's called A Warning from History. If you go to buymeacoffee.com/JFKbook, you can get the ebook for only $10. You can buy my notes. You can get a whole bunch of other stuff. And just to let everybody know, I've got 7 hardcovers signed available for sale. They're $75 shipped domestically. And I've got 2 soft covers. They're $50 each, signed, sent domestically only. If you want them internationally, you're going to have to pay like $30 to $50 in shipping. I just sent one to Canada the other day. It's $31 in shipping. So for you international people, if you want one of those, you're going to have to pay up. But that's going to do it for today, and I'll be back tomorrow continuing this week on Loran Eugene Hall, one of the assassins on the 6th floor. Thank you.